Maverick News, the antivirus program for your mind. And now, the Freedom Reporters.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Maverick family. Good evening, new viewers from all over the world. Welcome back to the Maverick News channel. Thank you, everyone, for joining us live tonight. We have a great special guest lined up, Kevin Michelizzi, and I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. Doing my best. He's a cyber security information warfare specialist. He's over in Crimea. He's on the ground there. And he is going to give us a firsthand report on what the situation is with that dam in Ukraine that was compromised. And as a result, some flooding has taken place. And we're going to try to cut through the mainstream media confusion and get you the real story from somebody who is right there in Crimea tonight. So without further ado, let's bring Kevin in. And I think Lori is going to be joining us shortly as well. Did I get your last name right, sir?
You got it right, Rick. And thanks for having me on the show.
No, it's my pleasure. And as I say, privilege to have you on. It really is, because you are right there in Crimea tonight and have been there for some time. And so you're able to give us a firsthand account of what's really going on with that dam that was compromised. What are you seeing there on your front?
Well, you know, the Kakhovka Dam really was a strategic point for Ukraine. You know, they didn't really blow it up. They took the top part off of it with about 80 shells, and it's lowered the levels of the water from 16 meters to 10 meters. So there was some flooding in the valley up in the Kherson region, but it hasn't affected Crimea much at all.
So we're seeing reports over here. Well, I mean, I'm seeing accusations both ways. Russia says Ukraine did it. Ukraine says Russia did it. If I watch the Western media over here, of course, Russia is the evildoer and to blame for not just this, but mass genocide as a result. And I have to. That's why you're here, because it's not believable to me what I'm seeing, especially with the CBC, CTV, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, all the letters.
Well, you know, if you listen to all of them, Russia blew up their own, billion-dollar bridge that they built. They shot drones at the Kremlin themselves. You just can't believe anything you hear out of the Western media these days. On the dam, you really have to look at, who benefited from it. Now, the Ukrainians say that the Russians did it, and they did it to, flood their positions in Kherson. But reality is the Russians had the low ground and the Ukrainians had the high ground. So the only thing that got flooded were the Russian fortifications, took out their minefields, and, it caused some panic in Crimea. So there really wasn't anything that Russia gained from this. Several days before the dam was blown, Ukraine released water from the Dnipro reservoir. So they brought the levels in the reservoir up in Kakhovka. And that was to try to get more water to flow down and, take out these positions.
So what does this mean for the people in the area? We're looking at some power disruptions, agricultural land affected. What else?
Yeah, the valley in Kherson pretty much, it got flooded. There was originally, they say, about 7 meters of water. It's down to, last report I saw, it depends on where you're talking in the valley, but anywhere between 6 meters and 1.5 meters. So it's taken out farmland, it's taken out homes of Russian speakers, and animals, both pets and farm animals have been hurt by this. You know, as far as the Crimean Canal, where we get water for agriculture, you know, it takes the water off at about the 10-meter mark of the reservoir. And that's about where the water is sitting in the reservoir right now, because they just took up off the top layer of the dam.
So again, strategically, what's the objective, or what does Ukraine gain by doing this, assuming that they are responsible?
Well, they gained wiping out the minefields and the fortifications that the Russians had built. They today have actually stopped releasing water from the Dnipropetrovsk dam. So they're now lowering the levels of the water. So it gives them a clear path for an offensive.
Okay. So they're what, pumping water out and what, I guess, trying to remedy things to the point where they can do something offensively? Is that kind of where we're at now?
Yeah, you know, they started this spring offensive for the 20th time, you know, just a few days ago. It's been about 3 days now. They haven't had a lot of success. They've made grounds in a couple of spots, but they raised the water levels in the reservoir initially. They blew up the dam, which then wiped everything out. Hey, Lori.
Hey, Kevin.
And
sorry I'm late.
It's okay. Good to see you.
Great to see you, my friend.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You were telling the story and I just kind of popped in.
Yep.
Keep going.
Yes, is what I was saying is Ukraine raised the water levels in the reservoir by releasing water from the upstream dams. So when they blew the dam, it was meant to cause more damage. Now, I think they intended to blow up more of the dam than they did. They just blew off the top layer. They didn't affect the main dam itself. So now they're blocking the water upstream to try to lower the levels to give them the ability to, you know, go through the areas where the Russians had their fortifications. Now, the disadvantage they have is now they got a bunch of mud to deal with again.
Yeah. The nuclear power plant, the mainstream media over here is making a big deal out of that. But from where I stand, it doesn't look like realistically that's having any real impact on the nuclear power plant that is upstream. Is that fair?
Yeah, the specialists are saying that there has been no effect on the nuclear power plant at all at this point. They do have backup cooling systems and alternate sources of water for doing that. So it isn't a big deal. The other thing is they say if the water level in the reservoir goes down low enough that it's affecting the nuclear power plant and the Crimean Canal, Russia's installed pumps there, so they can actually pump water out of the reservoir, the lower levels of the reservoir, into both the nuclear power plant and the Crimean Canal.
So you are an information warfare specialist, and can I get you to comment on what we're seeing with regard to the propaganda surrounding all of this?
You know, the United States is an expert at propaganda. They train their military in propaganda. They use computerized systems that simulate the internet. They have systems that measure what people's opinions are out there, and they can insert in the mainstream media, in social networks, directly different news stories to try to shift people's perception. Now, in doing that and blocking Russia's side of the stories from the West, they're driving the perception in the West in the direction that they want it. You know, they're experts at it. They're helping Ukraine do the same thing. Russia's in the, the 1980s on propaganda. They just don't know how to do it. So most of what you would see in their news typically is fairly truthful.
And your background, as you mentioned before we went on the air, is right out of the 1980s, and it looks like NASA Control Center. You have some connections to, don't you have some connections to the space program in the past in the 80s?
I worked on some of the space shuttle computers way back when in the 80s. I worked on video guidance systems for drones. So all these drones we've got flying around us out here are working on systems that I worked on. And I also, about a year and a half ago, ended a contract. I was working on the training system that the military uses for training their soldiers in information warfare. And they've placed these computer systems and the simulated internet in countries like Romania, Germany. They've got them in Guam, and they practice warfare, information warfare against Russia. They call them, the Republic of Cardosia, something like that. But when you look at all their maps and everything, it's a slightly skewed map of Russia, and they plan trainings around fighting Russia in Crimea, fighting Russia in Georgia, all the hot spots, fighting Russia and Ukraine.
Speaking of maps, most Americans sadly cannot find Ukraine on a map. They have no idea where you're located. I wanted to ask you, Kevin, because I'm not sure exactly where your location is on the peninsula. You don't have to be too specific, but approximately how far is your location from the Nova Kakhovka dam that was just blown? How far away are you?
I'm probably 300 kilometers from it.
Wow.
I can change my background and show you exactly where I am.
Really? Let me see.
So
what do you know? There's a map.
There's the Crimean Peninsula. And I got on my show practiced in pointing at the green screen of where I live. I'm way down here behind my name, but down on the southern point. And when you go way up here, the dam is off up here just a little ways.
So you are, you're south of there, quite a bit south of
there.
there.
I'm on the far south tip of Crimea.
And how is this affecting you, if at all, yet, as far as your water supply or other conveniences of modern life?
It isn't affecting our water supply in the least little bit. Since 2014, Russia has made, great improvements to the water supply system here. They have wells drilled. The reservoirs are full. So the drinking water situation is okay here.
We're being told just the opposite, of course. Here in the West, we're being told that there's no water in Crimea. They've disrupted the water supply and all this hysterical nonsense, which is why I wanted to ask you what's really happening.
Yeah, the Crimean Canal went down by about 20% with the blow up of the dam. Like I say, the dam is actually 16 meters, and they took 6 meters off the top of it. So there's still 10 meters of water back there. It's just at the point where the Crimean water canal is being filled, but that canal is used mainly for agriculture. So it's expected it will affect rice crops and sugar beet crops. And but they've placed pumps there now. I was telling Rick a little while ago, and they're actually pumping water out of the reservoir into the Crimean Canal to bring that back up. So
it sounds like they were anticipating this trouble, perhaps, and had a backup plan ready to go.
Well, Ukraine practiced blowing up this dam back several months ago.
I think it was last November, wasn't it?
Yeah.
November? Yeah.
November, December, in that time frame. So, it's not unexpected.
Right.
and it is what it is. You know, the only things
Well,
we're
yeah,
really
you
affected
live
with.
in a target area. You know that they intend to take Crimea back, and there you are, sitting right there in the middle of it.
As I was driving down the Tavrida highway a couple of days ago, my wife and I were talking about this with the billions and billions of rubles that Russia's put in the infrastructure here. And the fact that this is basically one big Russian military base at this point.
Mhm.
They won't give it up easily. And people say, well, the Germans took it from the Soviet Union at one point. But you have to look that the Soviet Union at the time had a weak army. It wasn't prepared for an all-out world war. The Germans had an extremely advanced army. Now the situation is opposite. There is literally no way that Ukraine can take this peninsula. They can cause a little bit of damage, but yesterday they sent 6 unmanned boats to attack a Russian ship in the grain corridor. And you guys don't hear about that in the West either. You hear about how Russia prevents the grain shipping from Ukraine.
Right.
But the Ukrainians are using that corridor to shoot at the Russian naval ships. Today we had 6 unmanned boats over in the Azov Sea, going
Again.
after another Russian ship. Now they were all destroyed. Last night we had 2 missiles shot at us. They were both taken down by air defenses. So we haven't actually been struck by anything. Kerch off over here. Let's see.
That's where they hit the bridge, right? The Kerch Bridge.
Yeah, where the bridge is here. They hit some oil depots over there back a month or so ago with minor damage.
It sounds like the way you describe it, it sounds like to the residents there, this is really just kind of a nuisance at this point. It's not like war going on all around you, bullets flying over your head, but it's dangerous enough. It sounds like the damage that they're doing is minimal enough that it's just kind of a nuisance.
Yeah, it's kind of a nuisance. The thing that they're doing is, again, it's because the Ukrainians are learning from the Americans. They're trying to cause panic in Crimea. There's been, a lot of news in Telegram, fake Russian channels saying, oh, they've crossed the border into Crimea. They're going to kill everybody. 3 million residents they're going to eliminate.
And they're bragging about this. They're just
bragging
bragging
about this.
We're going to kill all these innocent civilians on the Crimean Peninsula. Jesus.
Yep, because they're all traitors because they took Russian citizenship. So, and they live and help with the Russians. They live, peacefully with them. So they're all traitors. So they need to be eliminated. Now, is what it causes here is because from the Soviet Union times, people here are not used to the propaganda. They had their own forms of propaganda, but they're accustomed to listening to what the government told them. So it's ingrained in their nature. So people get shook up about things like this. Well, the Ukrainian government said it must be true. Well, the Russian government said, well, that must be true. So,
and both stories just can't be true because both sides are giving us different stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
So people are not too worried here. We do get some people who, I got asked the other day if I was going to flee from the peninsula if Ukraine came back in because the Tatars would slit my throat being an American. And
it's like we were friends.
Well, yeah,
I thought the Americans were the Ukrainians' friends. They're going to slit your throat, huh?
Yeah.
But you're an American who supports the wrong side. That's why there's a target on your back.
Yeah. And, they're trying to stigmatize the Tatars again. It's kind of like in 2014, they said, Tatars were being beaten in the street. They're being forced out of the peninsula. And as what you had is you had the small groups of vocal radicals. Same thing you guys get in Washington. The vocal radicals get all the news. And, my next door neighbor is a Tatar businessman, salt of the earth. Wonderful, wonderful man. They own businesses here. Russia has rebuilt up on the Ipetri Mountain, which is right up behind me here. Back in the Yushchenko days, Yushchenko went through and bulldozed their entire village to get rid of them. So this is what the Ukrainian president did to them. Russia built them new villages, apartment buildings, businesses, and gave them to them. And this is what Russia does. Like the Kakhovka Dam, all the people who got flooded out, their homes damaged, they're giving them certificates saying that they officially lived in that area, and they will get
new housing, right?
Free of charge from the Russian government. Right now, they're in shelters. They're being provided medical care. They're being provided food. Some defense against being struck by the Ukrainians. I was telling Rick they blew up one of the shelters today.
Yes.
So
saw that.
The Russian government takes care of the people.
I wanted to ask you, just to help us understand Crimea. I've always been fascinated by the place just because there's so much natural beauty there. It's more of a temperate climate, right? This is kind of a resort area traditionally of Russia. Is it kind of help me understand, is it kind of where the rich folks live, to put it plainly?
No, not at all. Yalta, which is west of me about 17 kilometers, is the resort area. We're right in the resort area, which is this end over here. The other end is all military, and is what you find most people here are either former military or former police from Russia and Ukraine. The people who live across the street from me, the entire family is former police from Western Ukraine. And
Western Ukraine. That's interesting.
Well, because under the Soviet Union, Ukraine was part of the same country, and people were moved all over. My wife is technically Ukrainian, but her mother is half Ukrainian, half Russian. Her father was half Ukrainian, half Russian. She's from Eastern Ukraine. She identifies as Russian. She's a Russian citizen now. So you have a hard time determining who, is really truly Western Ukrainian. Western Ukrainians tend to be dark-haired, dark eyes, very similar in appearance to the Polish. Whereas the Russians tend to be the fair-haired, green-eyed ones.
Very interesting. So you're saying that there is actually a pretty good working class contingent in Crimea, but it tends to be mostly military, right?
Mostly military. It's an advantage for me because I end up with lots of people I can speak English to.
Exactly.
All military speak English of some level.
Yep.
I have my bad Russian. They have their bad English. We get along just
and
fine.
Somehow you can manage to communicate.
Yes.
So I was curious to ask you, because you're American by birth, right? Where are you from?
I'm actually from Duluth, Minnesota.
I thought I detected some Minnesota.
I don't know what you're talking about, eh?
Yeah.
Don't know what you're talking about, eh?
Did you tell me you lived in Canada for a time? Or did I imagine that?
Nah, I think you imagined that.
Okay.
I may have mentioned that my father worked for Canadian National Railways. So I spent time there quite a bit, but I went from Minnesota to the Florida area. Then from there, I went to California, then to Seattle, back to Minnesota for a couple of years because my wife complained that she didn't like Seattle weather, and I didn't know what
I don't
cold
blame her.
was really like. And she now calls Minnesota the Siberia of America. So
It kind of is, actually.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good comparison, I think. So tell me a little bit about your life in the United States and how the heck you ended up in Crimea, Russia.
Well, I grew up in, a rural area of Minnesota. Lived a good life, middle-class life. Went to university, got a degree in electrical engineering, and that's where I first learned how to hack computers.
When was this? Is that
Actually, I
80s?
learned how to hack computers in the late 70s in high school. I got banned from the University of Minnesota computers at my high school because
Nice. Good
I had
job.
hacked it. So yeah, when I went to university, I hacked their computers. So it was just something fun to do.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah. Those were
I
the
actually,
days when hacking was just done for fun and out of curiosity, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So, from there, I actually went into programming computers rather than the hardware. And I worked on a lot of low-level systems because I understood the hardware and I could do the software to work with the hardware. And that's how I got involved in a company that was contracting on the space shuttle computer systems. And at the same time, we were working at Lockheed Martin on the first remotely guided drone systems that used videos to follow the topography and figure out where they were going.
I didn't even know they had those that long ago. Are we talking the 1980s? That
Yeah,
drone technology was already being
early
developed?
80s. Yeah. Now
Wow.
they still have the same camera systems, but they, they're now controlled by GPS.
Sure.
So, something we don't have much of in Crimea anymore because they have turned off all the GPS systems.
So what you're really saying is you were privy to all the alien UFO technology, and you're the guy who put it into actual use in the space program.
That was you,
Well,
huh?
Actually, let me push my antennas down. So
Your antennae are showing.
yeah,
Your antennae.
so
I
But
knew
you
it.
would be the
I
guy to
knew you
ask
were an
about that
alien. I
stuff.
just knew it.
You would be the guy. Don't hold out on us, Kevin.
Time to
okay,
come
I
clean,
admit it.
Kevin.
I was not born in the United States. I arrived in a Chinese balloon.
You just
Okay,
parachuted in.
This is the biggest question. Did we go to the moon?
Mm.
I believe we went to the moon. I don't think it was really, a TV studio. Just all the evidence says we did go.
Why haven't we
Okay.
been back, I wonder? Any ideas?
I would say because our politicians are stealing all the money.
Right. I always thought it was just kind of a been there, done that kind of thing. Why go back? We did it. We planted the flag. We've been there, done that. Let's go somewhere else, like Mars, right?
Yeah, it could be. I just believe in, the thievery of the government. So.
Yeah.
That
I'm a
seems more
libertarian, so I
plausible
agree.
to me than all of the, there's no way we could have done it. What about the Van Allen radiation belts? Everybody points to that and says that's why we can't go to. I'm sorry to get off track, but I can't resist since we're talking to a space shuttle guy. What about those radiation belts? Can you go through those or not?
Things like the space shuttle, they, they're well protected. The tiles on those things are massive. You cannot imagine. I actually saw the space shuttle blow up, that launch. We were on top of our building and watched that.
I was just going to
And
ask you about that.
Yeah, pieces of those tiles came down, and those things are enormous and they're thick. So, we have radiation here all the time. We can put on a silver suit and walk through a radiated area with no danger. So to say that we can't protect a spaceship is ridiculous.
So where were you on that day in 1986 when Challenger blew up? Were you at Cape Canaveral?
I was in a building just on the other side of the canal from, or the intercoastal waterway from Cape Canaveral, standing on top of the Lockheed Martin building.
What in the world was that like for someone who worked in this program? How did that feel?
It was surreal, but it was bound to happen. You know, when you start dealing with government projects, and again, the theft, when you're selling $600 hammers and toilet seats to the government, somebody's stealing money somewhere. And people
cutting corners.
Cutting corners, people, don't pay a lot of attention. And even without all that going on, there's just way too much going on to be able to cover it 100%. A leaky gasket, it's bound to happen. It's not seated quite correctly. You do your plumbing, you do your kitchen sink, and you screw the pipe together. You've got a washer in there and it's off just a little bit. You get squirted with water. So,
yeah, they probably hired a guy like me to put the settle together that day. See, and then it leaked. Yeah, that's what happens. I have plumbing to do here this week. I'm not looking forward to it, but again,
gonna get a face full of water again.
Yeah. People did not know that the computer system that ran the space shuttle was basically an Apple I computer. Same insides as they used in the Apple I computer. So that entire system, big fancy system, itty bitty little toy computers.
Wow. Like an Amiga.
An Amiga. I remember those things.
Not as advanced as an Amiga.
Yeah, they were pretty cool computers, actually.
Hard to believe that they could actually do what they did with something, I'll say, as primitive as that at the time, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, my phone has more computing power than that.
True.
It does.
It's amazing.
So to continue your story, how you ended up going from the United States to Russia and why and when? Tell me that story.
Well, as my career weaved through companies like Microsoft and stuff, I ended up working for a DoD contractor on the information warfare training system. And I really started looking at what our government was doing to their own people. And I looked at people like Scott Ritter, who have taken and they've, raised their voice against these things and what they've put him through.
Right.
And I started looking at, Russia may not be such a bad place. Now, I originally came here in 2006 when it was under Ukraine with my wife when I first met her.
Did you meet her there, or is she from the States, or she's from there?
She's from Eastern Ukraine.
Yeah.
So I met her with a stray phone call. I had a guy that worked for me from Ukraine, and he flew back to see his mother, and we had a regular call scheduled at nighttime his time, morning my time. And I misdialed his phone number, and I got this sleepy little hello from my wife. Woke her up in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning. And she just happened to be an English professor on top of it. So you can't tell me that there's no fate in things.
Wow. That is incredible.
Yeah. So she brought me here on vacation about 6 months later. And I liken Crimea, where we are in Crimea, to, maybe the Chico area in California, or maybe, the Carolinas. Very similar nature, the same temperatures. But, we had looked here for apartments for a while, and we talked about me retiring here, and we can live pretty well on an American pension here. And in the end, it turned out being fate again. In December of 2019, my mother-in-law got very ill, and I flew over with my wife the first of the year of 2020, and set her up to help her mother. I flew back to the States because I was working over there. And
during COVID, or was this before COVID?
No, this was pre-COVID, when COVID isn't a real thing. So in March, I was going to fly back to my company. It's when the COVID first started, they decided they would start doing remote work. So I decided I was going to fly back and I'd work from here. And I arrived in Moscow an hour and a half before they closed the borders.
Wow.
And my visa expired while I was here. I got permission. I have signed permission from Vladimir Putin to remain in the country beyond my visa because I had no way to leave.
Right.
And while I was here, my wife and I both decided that we would take residency. We bought a piece of property. We owned an apartment not too far from where we live now that we bought in 2015. But yeah, so we decided we'd take residency. My wife took citizenship, and based on her citizenship, I decided to take it. And
I was just going to ask if you have full citizenship there, and
I do.
Do you have your American citizenship? You have dual citizenship?
I have dual citizenship. My passport expires in September, so.
Do you have any plans to use that passport and come home before then, or are you just done with the United States forever?
I really don't care if I go back or not. My life is here. Everything we have here. My daughter graduates over there in December and plans to work in Moscow.
Really?
So, yeah.
So you're going to bring the whole family to you?
She used to want to live in the United States. She didn't want to live in Russia, but even being a Russian-speaking Ukrainian, she gets so much trouble from people that she doesn't like the United States anymore.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. That's very interesting. So it sounds like, I know several American expats who live in Russia now. Most recently, my friend Tara Reid, who is stranded there now. Do you know Tara?
I know of her. I've been trying to get an interview with her, but haven't had a lot of luck. I'm working my way up that way.
Yeah. What do you think about her exile there in Russia?
She will live just fine here. She's under the wing of Maria Butina, and Maria is actually a friend of mine, so I'll be interviewing her in a couple of weeks in Moscow. And, she will make sure that Tara is taken care of. She's a celebrity here right now.
Seems that way, yeah.
Yeah. People ask me sometimes, do I believe her story about Biden? Absolutely.
I do.
You could ask me the same thing about Trump. Yes, I believe the women's stories about Trump too. But
when you're famous, they let you do it, right?
Yeah, they let you do it.
But Tara wasn't really enjoying this encounter that she had with Joe Biden. She was just scared back then to say anything. I mean, her mom called Larry King live back in 1993 and told the story without naming her daughter or naming the senator, but she said, my daughter's a Senate aide and she was sexually assaulted by a senator, but she didn't say who. They were scared, and apparently for good reason, right? Because now Tara Reid is forced to stay out of her own country. She's told that if she comes back, there's a sealed indictment. She could end up being imprisoned, possibly for espionage.
Well,
I don't know where they get that, but
more than that, she says she's afraid for her life there.
Yes.
And with the way that the Biden administration is weaponizing, not only the FBI, you hear about the FBI all the time, but the NSA and the CIA as well. I believe that she could have been in serious danger if she stayed there.
I do too. And I worry about her family that she left behind, and I'm sad that she may never be able to come home and see her family. She had to leave everything behind. She only had like a week's worth of clothes in her suitcase when she was just there for a visit in Russia. She wasn't planning to stay. And then she got the hot tip from Congressman Matt Gaetz that it might not be safe to return home.
Yeah.
And she decided to stay. So I understand she's now applying for Russian citizenship.
She is. And again, she has the ear of the Duma. So I think that will go very easily for her.
I hope
Russia is all about who you know.
Rick, you got any questions? Fire away. Well, I'm kind of interested in your take on this whole thing with Trump and the FBI and your perspective, given that you have this background in information warfare. Is the Biden administration, are our governments, maybe in Canada and the United States, subjecting their own citizens to information warfare for political reasons?
Absolutely. If you've seen the Twitter files, the government has, and they have had for a long time, their fingers in all the social media networks.
That's right.
The journalists involved in the Twitter files, they've now criminalized all of them. Mm-hmm. They're not real journalists. We're going to indict you. We're coming after you. And those guys, I believe, are in danger as well.
Oh, I'm worried for Matt Taibbi for sure. They're coming after him.
Matt certainly could be another Snowden. Maybe he'll end up in Moscow too.
He's guilty of one thing, doing his job too well.
Yes.
Yeah. So if this is the case, and I believe you're right, do we actually have a functioning democracy here anymore?
Absolutely not. You think about over the last several elections, guys have gotten more votes than their opponent and lost. We get people that run for office that would be good candidates, and they literally run them out of town. They exclude them from debates. They make every excuse in the world not to have good candidates. And I don't believe that the American people, they go and they cast their vote. I don't think it really matters. If nobody went and voted, they would still say somebody won all the votes in the Electoral College. I think the Electoral College is equally corrupt as the government. I think it's all, who's paid for. I don't want to be sounding like a Soros conspiracy guy. I don't tend to be a conspiracy guy, but
there's more than one way to influence or control an election. You don't need to control voting machines. You can control an election through information warfare, political information warfare.
Well, 2016, the Russians, were interfering in the election, but that has since been proven false. The Russians that they blamed for doing it, and the company that they claimed was the troll farm that was spewing all this pro-Trump, anti-Clinton stuff, turns out really wasn't a real company. There was a shell company here, but they actually weren't in the business of, being a troll farm, basically. That propaganda came directly from the United States government. It came from the Clinton campaign.
Right.
And same thing with Trump. You think about the, accusations that he was, dealing with the Russians on things. And in the end, it comes out it was false. But how come nobody gets indicted for this stuff?
Friend of the Clintons.
Right.
You get a free pass. Get out of jail free card every time.
Have you been watching, or are you even aware of what is going on in Canada right now with the controversy surrounding possible Chinese interference in the Canadian election process? Are you aware of any of that?
Yeah, and it's the same thing. It's pure propaganda. The Canadian government, just like the United States government, they're using the same systems the United States does as an ally. They're looking at what people's thoughts are and where they're leaning towards voting for things and what they're going to do in elections. And then they're inserting stories into social media and the mainstream media to adjust people's thought process. Really, if you look at the Department of Defense's dictionary, when you look at propaganda, it's defined as adjusting the thought process of an enemy civilian population. But they're using these techniques on Americans and Canadians as well,
to get
and
right.
all of Western Europe.
And so the parties that are in power, and maybe it's just a uniparty at this point. I don't know, but they're sort of just getting people to vote the way they want them to vote by messing with their minds. It's like a giant psyop.
Yeah. How often do you hear about the Biden laptop? About the only thing you hear in the Western media is that, well, the laptop wasn't really his, and the computer guy who had it could have inserted the pictures in and modified them. This is the stuff you hear. You don't hear the actual facts come out.
So was that one of Trump's biggest failings and mistakes when he was president, that he didn't go after these issues and try to rectify them while he was in power, or is he just part of the swamp?
I think he tried to drain the swamp, but that military industrial complex just has so much control over things. There was a lot that I don't believe he could do. He went into office with all these grand plans of building walls and Mexico is going to pay, and I believe he truly believed he could do that. I think it was just the powers that be in the United States government just didn't allow it.
Right. Yesterday we did a whole show, pretty much a whole show, on this transgender drag queen story time stuff. And what I've been saying, and please, I want your take on this. I believe that the whole thing is manufactured, that the government, especially in Canada, but I think in the US as well, I think it's kind of hand in hand. The government in Canada, for instance, is paying or funding these drag queen story times to sort of poke the Christian right, the conservative right, their political opponents on the other side in the eye, to get a reaction. And the other side, they are reacting and trying to score political points with it. So it's just a big political game. And I see the whole thing again as political theater and information warfare. That's truly the way that I see the whole thing playing out. And the people protesting and clashing on the streets, they're just being used as pawns in a big psychological operation. Am I on anywhere near on the mark with that stuff?
I don't want to offend anybody out there for their views and feelings on such things. I always go back to what George Carlin said: if men were meant to be with men and women were meant to be with women, we'd all have two sets of goodies. But I think a lot of it is driven and paid for by the government to put down the conservative side of the country. I think there's an all-out war in the United States against conservatives. So how do you go after them? You eliminate their conservative values, tell them that they're wrong. You know, kill off everything that they believe in as a nation. The United States is supposed to be one nation under God. And, you know, they've pulled God out of the picture. Yeah. They've pulled moral values out of the picture.
Yes.
And it's, you know, it's the vocal minority that causes it all. You know, you can see the same things in Black Lives Matter, and nothing against blacks. I have lots of black friends, you know, even here in Crimea. And, but Black Lives Matter was a similar thing. The whole George Floyd, you know, in the end, when you look at the evidence that came out, he was drugged up. He didn't die from having a knee on his neck.
Yeah,
but
he was jacked up on fentanyl.
Yeah, but you still hear over and over and over that he was killed by a cop who's now paying the price for not killing him. And, you know, another pawn in the whole deal. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the Maidan in Ukraine, you know, I was there in the end of 2013 and the start of 2014 in Kiev. I watched Newland and Biden out there handing out food, $500 bills to people to protest. My brother-in-law earned $500 US to go to Kiev and protest.
Yep. Right. And that's how they fuel these color revolutions, the CIA, through propaganda and these campaigns to just cause disruption within countries, to get massive numbers of people out into the streets protesting, to apply pressure on the governments in whatever country it is. And I swear to goodness, I think we're seeing much of that play out here domestically, both in Canada and the US. I think they're using these very techniques on their own people, on us, the citizens, in order to manipulate us and get the result that they want at the polls. And that's the way I'm seeing things today. I think the politics in our countries has been so badly corrupted through these processes where they've really turned these weapons, these information political weapons, against their own people.
Absolutely. I can't add to that. You're absolutely right.
Which is why I'm right. I'm sorry, I'm right.
Yeah. Which is why it's important for people to get their news from places like Maverick News. You need to get your reports from independents. Patrick Lancaster in Donetsk.
Yes.
Good man. He tells the truth.
Yep.
You know, I've got a guest in 2 weeks on my show, 15-year-old girl from Lugansk who writes about and does poetry on her life growing up in that part of Ukraine. You know, you just have to get to the sources and be careful of social media. Facebook is a lousy place to get news. Twitter is a lousy place to get news. You know, Telegram, it's iffy, but you have to be real careful. You know, I watch guys like you. I watch, you know, Redacted. You know, for me, these are the two big news sources for the truth.
And your live stream podcast, how can people find you?
They can find me by going to that link under my name up there. That will get my stream on what life is like in Crimea. That's where we do our interviews from. That links to all our different channels we stream on. Or they can go to infowars.press, which is where my information warfare stuff comes out. And we'll start doing some streams on that this coming Wednesday.
And what's the focus of your channels? Is it news based? Or is it more in the vein of, you know, your area of specialty or expertise? What's your focus?
You know, the American Crimea one started out as just showing people that life here, even under sanctions, is normal. that Russia is not a bad place. And that's really the focus of that channel. We started doing interviews on that channel on a regular weekly basis. And the goal with that was to show people in the West that Russians are just like most other conservatives. They want to be left alone. They don't want war. They're nice people. Same sorts of things that, Scott Ritter did with his tour through Russia. The Infowars.press site, the goal of that is I was writing articles just to help people learn how to spot bad news. I've done a lot of articles about looking at pictures and determining what's fake, or where real pictures are used to, hype up a fake story. And when we start streaming this week on that, we're going to start addressing some of the real information warfare issues out there. The Bidens, the Clintons, a lot of the things that people are seeing on a regular basis out there. One of the guys that will be on the show regularly with me, he's a tad of a conspiracy guy, but there's some truth in most conspiracies.
What are some of the just a few things that people should look for as telltale signs that what they're looking at is propaganda and not actual news or valid information?
Well, if it comes from, any of the three-letter news services, that's the first sign. But
Yeah.
when you look at pictures in news stories, you really have to look at, have you seen that picture before? Because most of the time you have. It's been somewhere else, particularly when it pertains to Ukraine. I recently saw a story about a child that was, injured and starving in Ukraine. And it turned out it was a picture from Serbia back when we as Americans bombed the living daylights out of them. So I find that people should start looking at images that might be questionable. Do a Google picture search or a Yandex picture search.
You can bust them every time with a Google reverse image search.
Yeah.
We busted them many times in this war, passing off fake images.
Yeah. The other thing that they really need to look at when they're reading an article is the sources. Anytime you hear the statement of an unnamed source, it's probably fake. If they don't say, this is the source, this is the person who said it, guarantee it's fake.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I really don't like using anonymous sources or sources say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as an anonymous source.
Yeah. You have something you want to run here, Lori? I'll put it up on the screen.
Yeah, you were just talking about our mutual friend, Scott Ritter.
Oh, actually, you know what? Yeah, I've got that queued up here too. So why don't I just
why don't you run it on your end, Rick? It'll probably run smoother.
Yeah.
I've been having some internet problems here today.
I just have to find it. There it is. There it is right there. Okay, I've got it.
This is a great clip. I don't know if you've seen this yet, Kevin. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. This is from Scott's recent trip to Russia. He did a lot of book signings and Q&As, and this one was Scotty's on fire.
And in case people don't know, who Scott Ritter is, former UN weapons inspector. He has his U.S. tour of duty video channel. You guys have both been on his channel, and Scott has been on here on Maverick News a couple of times.
Friend of the show.
And just let me know when you want me to hit play.
Hit play. Let's see it.
60 miles away from where I live.
60 милях от того места, где я живу, от моего дома.
There's a park where they have a statue of Stepan Bandera.
В парке есть статуя Степана Бандеры.
Every summer,
Каждое лето
Banderists gather.
там его сторонники собираются.
wearing their brown uniforms,
в коричневой униформе
holding their torches,
и с факелами.
and their photographs of Stepan
И с
Bandera.
фотографиями, портретами Степана Бандеры.
How can that happen?
Как это возможно?
In Canada, they have a deputy prime minister who supports Stepan Bandera.
И премьер-министр поддерживает Степана Бандеру.
And in Germany,
В Германии
you have a government willing to send German tanks to Ukraine to fight Russians.
И в Германии решают послать в Украину немецкие танки, чтобы воевать с русскими.
Think about what I just said.
Подумайте об этом.
German tanks
Немецкие танки
Deutsche
in
Panzer.
Ukraine
в Украине,
to fight Russians.
чтобы воевать с русскими.
We did that already,
Мы это уже делали
but we're doing it again.
и делаем снова.
History matters.
История крайне важна.
And Germany has forgotten its history.
Германия забыла свою историю.
America has forgotten its history.
И Америка тоже забыла свою историю.
Canada has forgotten its history.
Канада забыла.
And it's unforgivable.
Это непростительно.
My uncle's comrades did not die so that this would happen.
Мои друзья, соратники моего дяди не за это умирали.
27 million Soviets did not die so this would happen.
27 миллионов советских граждан умерли тоже не для этого.
I don't know how this war is going to end,
Я не знаю, как закончится эта война,
but I do know this.
но знаю точно одно.
Russia is on the right side of history.
Россия на правильной стороне.
Scotty's on fire.
Scotty's on fire, yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
And it's interesting because, when he started his tour, he said that he was only going to talk about nuclear disarmament.
And just, I don't know if he explained, but he just got back from a tour through Russia.
Yeah, he's there for
And
about a
while
month,
there, I
I
guess he
think.
was promoting his book and promoting peace.
It's interesting. His book's called Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika, but the Russians don't like to talk about perestroika. So his publisher changed the title of the book for the Russian audience. I don't speak any Russian. Do you, Kevin? Can you tell me what how they changed the title?
I don't recall what the title is though. So
Yeah,
my wife
Russian.
had to tell me. Yeah.
Right.
I speak very lousy Russian.
I hope I can even pronounce the name of that dam correctly. Is it Nova Kakhovka? How's that pronounced?
In Russian, it's Kakhovskaya.
Kakhovska.
So you're
Well, I had that
getting
completely wrong.
you're getting almost the Ukrainian name correctly, which is what you guys hear.
Yes. Okay. That explains that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyway, continue with your thought about Ritter's tour of Russia.
It was interesting. Scott came here, and one of the first things that happened when he landed on the ground is his agenda was leaked. And I actually was the one who notified him that his agenda was leaked online.
Oh.
So I found that out. So they changed his entire agenda. And from that point on, nobody knew more than 7 hours in advance where he was going to be and when he was going to be speaking.
Right. Which was a logistical nightmare trying to do a book tour when people wanted to come see him and they didn't even know where the event was going to be and what time and what city. And
it was, in fact, when he was in Sevastopol, I didn't know it until 2 hours after the event. He sent me a message at 9 o'clock in the morning, but because everything in Crimea, whenever there's anything going on with Ukraine attacking, all the GPS, all the mobile operators, everything basically stops. So his message didn't actually leave his phone until 7 o'clock for his 5 o'clock event. So I missed him because of that.
I see.
And so, originally he was supposed to land in Moscow and fly to Vladivostok on the east side and then work his way back to be in Moscow on May 9th.
Right.
And
for Victory Day.
Yes, for Victory Day. And instead they went a little bit east and then back west and then north, and they really mixed it up and it really messed with his schedule. He originally was only going to talk about nuclear disarmament, and the importance of, having these strategic initiatives done. But as you can see, he got more and more excited the further he went, as he met with the military here, the special police. I mean, he met everybody that was anybody in Russia. And he started getting worked up more and more. People were asking him questions because that's what these people wanted to know from him, is his viewpoint on this war and who was going to win. Now, that clip is the first time I have ever heard Scott say, I don't know who is going to win. He has been adamant for a little over a year now that Russia is going to win and there's no way they won't.
Right.
And he's taken some criticism recently from the guys in the Donetsk and Lugansk militaries for not actually visiting them. And I've tried to explain to these guys that he really had no control over his schedule, but they said he is speaking about who can and who cannot win this war, but he doesn't know what's going on the front line. So I don't hold it against him. That isn't really necessary for him to go to the front line to see what's going on, because
I wouldn't want him there. Too dangerous. Too dangerous.
Well, my wife won't let me go there either. So
of course she won't.
But
you have a son in the military, is that correct? Your son? Or her son?
No, I have a son who works in information warfare in the United States.
Oh, okay. I must have been confused on that. I thought you had a son who was actually in the fighting over there.
Yeah, I have a brother-in-law who lives in Ukraine. He's not in the fighting. He is pro-Ukrainian and talks about he won't come to visit his mother here in Crimea until it's liberated by the Ukrainians. But he hides in a friend's mother's apartment to not be nabbed by the military commissars and sent to the front.
I see.
So it's easy to talk about it when nobody's shooting at you.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was surprised to hear him say he didn't know how this is going to end as well when I saw that, because that's the only time I've heard him say that.
Do you think the reason he's saying that is because now it looks like NATO troops are about to get involved in more NATO equipment, planes, and we're throwing everything but the kitchen sink at it at this point because we're desperate. That could change the trajectory that Scott's been predicting all along, confident of Russian victory. You start bringing in NATO aircraft and more NATO forces, that changes the game.
Yeah, it's war. Anything can happen in war. Russia's made some mistakes. They can make more mistakes. They, they lost a little bit of ground in 2 areas today. They gained it back again. I personally have to go with what Scott has said in the past. I don't think the military equipment is going to make any difference. The jets, we're talking, a few here and a few there, and they have no air defenses to help protect those jets. They've got limited missiles, air-to-air missiles they can put on those jets. They can't compete against 5th generation Russian aircraft. So I don't think it will do any good. That's just my personal opinion. The Brits sending long-range missiles, that's concerning to me. I'm glad the United States is still refusing. I think the United States will send them in the end as well.
What about the depleted uranium?
The depleted uranium, I don't have an opinion on that. I've looked at, reports that say it really doesn't affect things that much, and other reports that say, it'll leave radiation all over the place. I tend to lean that direction, but I've also seen news reports with dead fish all over the place, and they say, see what depleted uranium does when you blow up a tank, and it was propaganda. You know, they don't have millions of fish dying in the region where these tanks have been blown up. So
I'm going to throw this out there because and you tell me what your take is on this, but to some degree, I see what the West and NATO countries are doing. I see that they're sending sort of their old weapons, their old tanks, their old jets into Ukraine. It's sort of like a surplus yard sale clearinghouse. Let's put another country into debt and get them to buy all of our old crap and then have Russia blow it up, and then we'll just own the damn country scenario. I mean, they're sending in F-16 jets that, date back as far as like the 1980s. It just looks like target practice to me.
And they're stripping all the advanced weaponry out of them. So the advanced computer systems, the advanced weaponry, because they don't want the Russians to get their hands on it.
Who wants to fly one of those things? In fact, if you watch the new Top Gun movie with Tom
Bucket of
Cruise,
bolts.
did you see that? Did you see that movie? And then he gets into that old jet and goes head to head. But Maverick, it's not the plane, it's the pilot. I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't want to fly the F-16. No,
it's an old bucket of bolts.
You're doomed if you get one of those things, man.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to take it up against a MiG-35 or an Su-35. So
no, exactly. I mean, that movie in the end was so unrealistic. It's like he didn't stand a chance. But of course, he's Maverick, right? So he made it.
Yeah.
But real war and real life is not like a Hollywood movie. So those F-16s and a lot of this stuff they're sending there, they're just dumping obsolete weaponry in there. And I think that also speaks to what Biden said, which is that they've admitted that they want this to become a war of attrition, to deplete Russian military capacity with the ultimate goal of regime change. Your views?
And regime change and breaking Russia up into little republics that they can control easier.
Right.
This is my concern with places like Britain sending long-range missiles. Now, I have my personal butt that I get concerned with that, because I used to be out of range of most of the weapons they had. But these new, what are they, the Storm Shadows, can reach pretty deep into Russia. And, they're shooting them down. That's great. But if the United States starts providing them, and you start seeing these weapons being used further and further and further into Russia, it will lead to World War III, and we might as well all stick our heads between our legs and kiss our butts goodbye.
And at what point do we call this an invasion of Russia? There have been many incursions into Russian territory, certainly since these 4 republics voted last year to join Russia. It didn't stop the attacks. The attacks continue. They continue to escalate, and they're now crossing deeper and deeper into Russia. So at what point do they say this is Operation Barbarossa? Is it going to take just a wall of tanks rolling in before we admit that Russia is in fact being invaded?
Yeah, even if you ignore the republics that joined Russia, they are part of Russia now. So, nothing can ever be done about that. They will never give them up. But even if you ignore them, they're going into the Belgorod region up near Kharkiv, now you're getting into what Russians are saying today is, why aren't we calling for all-out war against Ukraine? Because you said, Mr. Putin, that if there were attacks on Russian territory, you would take drastic measures. And it shows the patience of this man. He does not want to be harming civilians. He doesn't want to destroy the infrastructure in Ukraine, because they are brothers and sisters. I told Rick earlier, well, maybe you were on then. I don't recall what you've heard.
You
But
say it
my
again.
wife, my wife is half Russian, half Ukrainian. Most Soviets are so intermixed. They are brothers and sisters. Western Ukrainians, they view them as Polacks. But Eastern Ukrainians are brothers and sisters, and they don't want to be harming them and destroying their villages. You guys hear, and I see it in a lot of the Western press and a lot of the Western and Ukrainian Telegram channels, about how Mariupol was absolutely leveled and destroyed. But they have built brand new homes for people, new apartments, new stores. The city has really been brought back. So
It's
when
amazing how fast they did that too.
Yes.
How quickly they rebuilt Mariupol.
the banks here have been directed to provide whatever money is necessary to the military and for rebuilding. So, I hear this talk about, we're going to keep Russia's assets until they pay back Ukraine so Ukraine can rebuild. Russia's already rebuilding Ukraine.
That's right. So I was talking with a friend last night about World War III, and are we in it? Are we near it? There's that debate. Are we actually in World War III, or are we on the brink of World War III? And it seems like everybody has a different definition of what World War III actually is. To some people, it's not World War III unless it's nuclear. To others, like myself, who tend to take a historical view, there was never any formal declaration of World War I or World War II. They were just, one nation state declares war on another nation state, and then they declare war on somebody else. And next thing you know, you've got a world war. But, back then we didn't have an international body like the United Nations who might declare a world war. So what my friend and I were discussing, and I kind of wanted to get your take on it, Kevin, was to this day, Russia has not declared war on Ukraine. They still call it a special military operation. I think that's been a very wise choice by Vladimir Putin to not make it a formal declaration of war, even though I know that there are many in his Duma that are pushing him to do that, to just make it official and to call it what it is, I suppose, a war. But Ukraine has not declared war formally on Russia either, right? This is all a sneaky kind of world war. It's different from previous world wars where there were formal declarations of war by the countries involved. And in this case, the United States is not a declared party. Canada's not a declared party. No member of our NATO allies have declared war on Russia. And yet everybody knows that's what it is. They've telegraphed quite clearly that that's what it is, but nobody wants to actually put it on paper and make it a formal declaration. What are your thoughts on that?
If we limit it to the sphere of Russia, it is the West versus Russia. Is it a world war? That's iffy. But now let's take a look at Serbia and Kosovo. Now, whose fingers are in that? It's the United States again. And reality is that's a war, or it soon will be a war, because Serbia is not going to put up with what's going on in Kosovo. And it's kind of hypocritical of the West to say, well, Kosovo is an independent nation. They need to have their rights, because they actually didn't legally become an independent republic like Crimea did. People here voted for it. That was a democratic process. But this is illegal, but Kosovo is legal. Wait a minute. So you have that going on. We've got little wars breaking out, in Africa, we've got these little wars between one or two countries here and there all over the world. So I would say the world is at war.
Right.
Is it World War III? I don't know. I could argue for it. I could argue against it. I don't think World War has anything to do with nuclear arms, but I can guarantee if the United States or Western Europe pushes too far on the Ukrainian borders and they try to have regime change and they try to break it up into republics, that will be the end of the world, because Russia will use nuclear weapons to defend its sovereignty.
Let me ask you this, because they've made it very clear that they want to assassinate Vladimir Putin. When they sent that drone to the Kremlin on just before May 9th, just before Victory Day, they say, Russia says that was an assassination attempt against the president of Russia. What happens if they succeed in killing Putin?
I think all hell will break loose.
I do too.
The Duma will no doubt declare war. There will be trouble, big trouble in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you also have to take, Russians are lousy at propaganda. But
you think so? I think they're pretty good at it, actually.
They are back in the 80s with propaganda. They are not good at propaganda at all.
Okay, I can see that.
But you have to.
This is coming from the guy with the 1980s NASA background behind him. Just kidding.
Yeah, actually, I snagged that from War Games.
That's like I was going to say,
yeah.
I remember that movie.
Yeah. So, what you have to keep in mind with the Russians is if it comes out of Medvedev's mouth, he's just blowing smoke. He's a hothead. He's a Trump.
Yeah.
We need to do this.
And yet they tell us that when he speaks, he's actually speaking for Putin and saying the things that Putin is too diplomatic to say, and that Dmitri's his mouthpiece. But I tend to agree with you on that. I think he's kind of a loose cannon who does not speak for Putin. He's a loose
cannon, or they would have already declared war against Ukraine.
Right.
They already would have nuked Ukraine. At some point, he said we should just nuke them off the earth.
He did. He did.
So, yeah, he is not speaking for Vladimir Putin.
What if he were to succeed Putin? Let's say they kill Putin. Everyone seems to think Dmitry would replace him. Then what happens?
He would never be elected to replace him. I don't know what the succession is in Russia, but if it came down to an election to replace Putin, he would never win because Russians didn't like him as a president. He was too wishy-washy, too friendly with the Americans.
Interesting, because now he's just the opposite of that. He's anything but wishy-washy and not friendly to us.
He likes that publicity. And he's not the only one. So who do you think, I think that Putin is likely to win the next election, right? They're having elections in March of 2024 before our big presidential election. Russia has their presidential election. And everybody's watching to see what will happen. Of course, the pundits over here are predicting that Putin's going to lose, and that's how they can get rid of him. I disagree. I look at his approval ratings over there, and it seems to me, unless something goes horribly wrong between now and then, he's likely to be reelected. Don't you think? I think it's extremely likely he'll be reelected. He just has too much support here. And, now that they've changed the Constitution so he can run as many times as he chooses to, people look at it as, why change somebody who does good for the country?
Especially in the middle of a special military operation, if you don't want to call it a war.
Yeah. Now you start getting attacks inside of Russia and he doesn't act on it. Um,
Right.
that could change the story.
I was going to ask you what the temperature of the Russian people is about Putin's handling of the war so far.
In general, people are okay with the way he's handling the special military operation because they have relatives there.
Of course.
I recently transferred money for an FSB agent to a relative in Ukraine. So,
Holy cow.
yeah. So, it's their brothers and sisters. So nobody wants to see them hurt. They do want them liberated from, Western Ukraine. As long as I've known my wife, there has been the argument between the Western and Eastern Ukrainians that they should split the country down the Dnipro River and
Absolutely.
each one
I
take
agree.
a different side.
That's the best way to solve this, if you ask me. That's always been the best way to solve this problem historically. Yep.
Now you get attacks on the Kremlin and, you get the politicians jumping up and down.
Right.
You woke up the bear, they're going to growl, and then that's the end of it.
Yep. And Scott, Ritter told us, he couldn't go to Victory Day itself. He was allowed to go to the dress rehearsal, I think the day before, but for security reasons, they would not let him attend on Victory Day. And it turns out on May 9th, the Ukrainians sent at least 3 drones right to Moscow, and they were trying to hit the Victory Day parade. Had they succeeded? Oh my God, Kevin, I don't have to tell you how the Russian people would have responded to that. We'd be in all out war right now,
Yep. Yeah. And, there's a good number of Russians who want to know why, Ukraine just isn't wiped off the face of the earth. I'm going to be interviewing one of the Duma members in a couple of weeks, and my wife got questions. She just came back from Moscow on the train. She got questions from people she was in the train with for me to ask from the Russian perspective. My mother-in-law, and they want to know, why do we still maintain diplomatic relations with, countries like Finland?
Us? Oh,
like the United States.
Right.
Why don't we just eliminate the problem? And it just isn't Putin's style.
Right. That's true. Putin is a fine diplomat. I've always respected that about him. Even when he has some tough talk for us, I always feel like it's honest. And it's something that we need to hear, whether we want to hear it or not. I think his criticisms of the West are legitimate. I've always felt that way.
Yeah, Russia has professional politicians. I mean, they go to school to be a politician. Lavrov, he is a professional diplomat.
One of the best. One of the best.
And who does the United States have for diplomats? Oh, well,
We've got Antony Blinken.
You got Antony Blinken, yeah.
We got Winkin, Blinken, and Nod.
Blinken
Those
and
are our
Nod,
diplomats. And we've got our, something, I don't know if you've noticed or if you're following the presidential contest here in the United States, but every single presidential candidate in this race, as far as I know, every last one of them seems to be reading from a script that every presidential candidate gets this script, and they have to say the words. Anytime Putin comes up, they have to call him a gangster, a bully, and a thug. It's just required. You must say the words. You cannot say any nice words about Vladimir Putin. It's just not allowed in American politics. And I think to myself, you're talking about how diplomatic, how expert they are at diplomacy in Russia. Of course, Lavrov, in my opinion, is one of the best diplomats in world history. I think he's up there with Molotov, maybe better than Molotov. Putin himself is a fine diplomat. He chooses his language so very carefully. And we've interviewed the ambassador to the UN, Dmitry Polyansky, here on this show. also
Yeah.
a master diplomat. And I look at these candidates who want to be the future leader of the free world, if you want to call us that. I don't really think we are anymore, but they can't seem to find any diplomatic words to say. They're coming at it with all this hostility and insults and name calling, and I'm thinking to myself, we're never going to have peace if this is the leadership that we're looking at. Even my guy, I'm a volunteer on the RFK Jr. campaign, wearing my T-shirt today, and even he disappointingly reads from that script and uses those words, which I wish he wouldn't. I think you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And if he's going to be the next president of the United States and he hopes to bring a peaceful resolution to this conflict, how's he going to do that using words like gangster, bully, and thug when he's talking to Putin?
Yeah.
Is he going to try and say that to Putin's face? Does anybody have the guts to say that to Putin's face? Or is this just what they say when Putin's not in the room? What do you think?
It's probably what they say when he's not in the room. I believe they're following a script. RFK, he's changed his tone in what he says.
True.
And it comes back to the same thing. The thing that really amazes me about Russian politicians is I guarantee you have never seen Putin reading off of a teleprompter.
Never.
He can speak to people for 4 hours straight,
Off the
answering questions
off
the cuff,
Seen
and he
him do
has
it.
the data up here.
Right.
And
he doesn't
we
use
talk-
speech writers either. He writes every word of his own speeches.
Yeah, we actually had a guy who claimed he was a speechwriter for Putin. And I saw a bunch of people, all up in arms about this in the West about, his speechwriter said, and it's like, he doesn't have
He
one.
doesn't have one, as far as I
Carries
know.
it in his brain.
Yep. That's right.
Lavrov, same thing.
Mhm.
You can carry on a full conversation with him in multiple languages, and all the information is up here.
Yeah. Our guys can't do that. Joe Biden sure as hell can't do that. He can't even
Joe
stand up.
Biden can't remember his
for 2
name when
minutes.
he's got it on the teleprompter.
Even Trump, Trump relies a lot on the teleprompter. It's rare that you see Trump make a speech anymore without his trusty teleprompter. Kennedy's able to do that. He can go without a teleprompter. That speech in Boston, he didn't have one and didn't even have a written script. That was all 2 hours off the cuff. And of course, I want to see Bobby Kennedy become the next president. And here's why. Yesterday was the 60th anniversary of a very important speech. I think it was the greatest speech his uncle, John F. Kennedy, ever gave while he was president. On June 10th, 1963, he gave his famous, what they call the peace speech at American University. And that was the first time since FDR, since World War II, at the height of the Cold War, that any American president ever said anything nice about the Russians, actually complimented them for their achievements in science and the arts and their amazing victory in World War II, and actually acknowledged the fact that the Russians did the lion's share of the fighting and actually won the war in Europe. It was a remarkable speech, and that's why we still celebrate it 60 years later. But, Bobby, this fellow right here, who's now running for president, his nephew, he understands very well his history. He understands the Cold War. He understands his uncle's presidency and his relationship with Khrushchev. And it's unfortunate. That's why it's so unfortunate when I hear him talking with this belligerent language towards Vladimir Putin, because that's not what John Kennedy would have done. Even at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we were toe-to-toe, never, ever, when you look at the correspondence, their letters have been published, Kennedy and Khrushchev's correspondence. There's a wonderful book out where you can read their letters. Never, ever, ever did they use language like that. They always addressed each other by their proper diplomatic title. Their language was always quite friendly, even at a moment like that. And I feel that Bobby understands very well the root causes of this war. He understands that NATO provoked this war, and that Russia is not entirely to blame, but there's still
And
those things he has to say to get elected, right? In the Democratic Party. You can't say that out loud, can you?
yeah, he used to say that out loud, though.
He did. He did.
So I don't know. I believe Western politicians have just forgotten how to talk.
All they know is platitudes and word salad, it
Yeah.
seems.
Pick up the phone, call Putin, and say, how do we resolve this? And it's
Exactly.
over with.
Yeah, exactly. And Donald Trump loves to say that, only I can fix it and I can end this war in 24 hours. Just elect me and I can fix everything. But, I'm thinking to myself, hey, Trump, why do you have to wait until January 2025 to pick up the damn phone? You've got your own plane, dude. Why don't you just fly over there? He's like the only Western politician who hasn't flown over there yet. If he wants to really end the war, if he's a man of peace like he claims, have a Zoom meeting. For crying out loud, why are you waiting? He says he wants to stop the bloodshed. He says he wants to stop the killing, and he wants to stop it in January 2025. Well, what about all the people that are dying now and that are going to die between now and then?
Yeah, I personally don't think it's going to last that long. I
You know?
could be wrong, but I think Trump's big thing right now is even if he got on the plane and flew to Moscow, there isn't anything he can really do. As president, maybe he can dry up the funding. Maybe he can, call Zelensky and say it stops today.
And yet
Maybe.
he's the one who increased their funding in the first place, that laid the groundwork for what Biden later expanded. But during the impeachment of 2019 and 2020, that was all about the perfect phone call and the aid to Ukraine. And Trump gave them more in terms of dollars and weapons than the Obama administration had. So he was ramping this thing up. Now it's getting out of control and he wants to dial it back because he doesn't want nuclear war. But he too calls Putin a bully and a thug and a gangster. And I'm not hearing diplomatic language from him either.
And when he was president, Putin was nice. He was a good guy. So,
and then he wasn't, right? Then he wasn't.
Yeah.
So Trump's been all over the place on this. So I'd like to play a little excerpt from John F. Kennedy's peace speech on this 60th anniversary. You guys want to listen to a few moments of this?
Yep.
Let it go. Yep.
I think it's so relevant today. Every word. It's like this speech could have been given last week, and in my opinion, should have been given last week.
I am not referring to the absolute, infinite concept of universal peace and goodwill, of which some fantasies and fanatics dream. I do not deny the value of hopes and dreams, but we merely invite discouragement and incredulity by making that our only and immediate goal. Let us focus instead on a more practical, more attainable peace, based not on a sudden revolution in human nature, but on a gradual evolution in human institutions, on a series of concrete actions and effective agreements which are in the interests of all concerned. There is no single simple key to this peace, no grand or magic formula to be adopted by one or two powers. Genuine peace must be the product of many nations, the sum of many acts. It must be dynamic, not static, changing to meet the challenge of each new generation. For peace is a process, a way of solving problems. With such a peace, there will still be quarrels and conflicting interests, as there are within families and nations. World peace, like community peace, does not require that each man love his neighbor. It requires only that they live together in mutual tolerance, submitting their disputes to a just and peaceful settlement. And history teaches us that enmities between nations, as between individuals, do not last forever. However fixed our likes and dislikes may seem, the tide of time and events will often bring surprising changes in the relations between nations and neighbors. So let us persevere. Peace need not be impractical, and war need not be inevitable. By defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we can help all people to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly towards it. And second, let us re-examine our attitude towards the Soviet Union. It is discouraging to think that their leaders may actually believe what their propagandists write. It is discouraging to read a recent authoritative Soviet text on military strategy and find on page after page wholly baseless and incredible claims, such as the allegation that American imperialist circles are preparing to unleash different types of war, that there is a very real threat of a preventative war being unleashed by American imperialists against the Soviet Union, and that the political aims, and I quote, of the American imperialists are to enslave economically and politically the European and other capitalist countries and to achieve world domination by means of aggressive war, unquote. Truly, as it was written long ago, the wicked flee when no man pursueth. Yet it is sad to read these Soviet statements, to realize the extent of the gulf between us. But it is also a warning to the American people not to fall into the same trap as the Soviets, not to see only a distorted and desperate view of the other side, not to see conflict as inevitable, accommodation as impossible, and communication as nothing more than an exchange of threats. No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue. As Americans, we find communism profoundly repugnant as a negation of personal freedom and dignity. But we can still hail the Russian people for their many achievements in science and space, in economic and industrial growth, in culture, in acts of courage. Among the many traits the peoples of our two countries have in common, none is stronger than our mutual abhorrence of war. Almost unique among the major world powers, we have never been at war with each other. And no nation in the history of battle ever suffered more than the Soviet Union in the Second World War. At least 20 million lost their lives. Countless millions of homes and families were burned or sacked. A third of the nation's territory, including 2/3 of its industrial base, was turned into a wasteland, a loss equivalent to the destruction of this country east of Chicago. Today, should total war ever break out again, no matter how, our two countries will be the primary target. It is an ironic but accurate fact that the two strongest powers are the two in the most danger of devastation. All we have built, all we have worked for, would be destroyed in the first 24 hours. And even in the Cold War, which brings burdens and dangers to so many countries, including this nation's closest allies, our two countries bear the heaviest burdens. For we are both devoting massive sums of money to weapons that could be better devoted to combat ignorance, poverty, and disease. We are both caught up in a vicious and dangerous cycle, with suspicion on one side breeding suspicion on the other, and new weapons begetting counterweapons. In short, both the United States and its allies, and the Soviet Union and its allies, have a mutually deep interest in a just and genuine peace and in holding the arms race. Agreements to this end are in the interests of the Soviet Union as well as ours. And even the most hostile nations can be relied upon to accept and keep those treaty obligations, and only those treaty obligations, which are in their own interest. So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity.
I love that. I love that. And he says, in the final analysis, what we have in common is that we all inhabit the same planet, we all breathe the same air, and we are all mortal. I just got a shiver down my spine. That was 60 years ago yesterday, and it sounds like it could have been delivered today. But we don't have a president speaking words like that today. You don't hear those conciliatory gestures. You don't see them.
Maybe we should have presidents listening to this today.
I wish. I hope a future president is listening. I'm certainly going to send Bobby this broadcast.
It's interesting because his words were very true, but they were also prophetic, because a lot of what he was talking about is what our government is doing today.
Isn't that ironic?
Yeah.
I noticed that too.
You know what else is ironic is many people say that if JFK was alive today, he would be a Republican. And some people think that RFK Jr. is running for the wrong party and should probably be running for the Republicans. So
that's right.
History
That's right.
rhyming,
Even
maybe.
the Democratic Party, the party bosses and the insiders. There were several of them were interviewed for a piece. I think it was in the Washington Post a few days back, and all of them were saying, "Leave, Bobby. Go run with the Republicans. We don't want you in this party. You don't fit. We don't like you. We don't want you. You're in the wrong party. Why don't you just go run with the Republicans?" So that's coming from the bosses in the Democratic Party.
The shame of it is even if he loses the nomination to Biden, that he would have no chance to run as an independent. Right. What does it come to when you have to be a Republican or a Democrat to run for president?
And it's been that way since the 1990s. And the reason is Ross Perot. Remember Ross Perot? He did so well in 1992, got about 20%, 20% in the general election. It was like the best any third party or independent candidate had ever done. And it was because he performed so well in the presidential debates, right? That was, the American people liked what he had to say. So in the next general election in 1996, the Commission on Presidential Debates, which is an independent entity controlled by the two parties, basically excluded all independent candidates. And that's been the rules ever since, which is why Ralph Nader was not allowed to debate when he ran in 2000. And I think he ran again in 2004. He showed up at the debates. Literally, he showed up. Like somebody at Fox News gave Nader a press pass. And, he wanted to see if he could maybe sneak in there and get on the debate stage. And they threatened to arrest him. And they told him to leave the premises. And I mean, it was hardcore, man. They're not going to let an independent or third party candidate on that debate stage because they're afraid of another Ross Perot. And I think that if Kennedy ran independent, he could do serious damage to the two parties in a general election, and whatever happens, he would get blamed, just as Nader got blamed for the George Bush presidency. Al Gore never stopped crying about Ralph Nader, and the Democrats.
Aren't you running a poll? You're running a poll right now, right, Lori?
I am indeed. Yeah.
And how is that shaping up?
Oh, let's take a look. I haven't had a chance to look at it today. Have you got that queued up on your side? I can find it real quick.
No, I don't actually.
Yeah, I'm running a poll actually. Me and my Twitter polls, but I'm running a new one, and I'm asking voters, how do you feel about this? Should Robert F. Kennedy Jr. switch parties? And if he ran as a Republican, would you vote for him? So let me take a look here. I'll pull it up on the screen. if I can. So we've got about 517 votes so far. And let me pull this up for you guys so you can take a look too. Share my screen with you. And here we go. Can you see that?
There it is.
Yeah. So would you vote for RFK Jr. if he switched parties and ran as a Republican? And the poll is open for 7 days. I hope that everybody out there listening will go cast a vote. If you're on Twitter, you do have to be a registered user of Twitter to vote. But if you have a Twitter account, go cast your vote. So far, get this, 54, almost 55% say yes, that they would vote for Kennedy as a Republican. Only 17% say no. Maybe, not sure, about 10%. And then there's the stubborn independent 17% who say absolutely not, never going to vote for anybody who's got an R or a D next to their name. Just not going to do it. So,
and this is part of the problem with the politics in the United States. Some people will never vote Republican or Democrat. Some people will only vote Republican no matter who the candidate is, and some will only vote Democrat. And why? What happened to picking the best candidate?
See, that's it, Kevin. I vote for the person, not the party.
Yeah.
And you know, for most of my career, I've always been one of those third-party voters. Been a libertarian for 27 years now, and up until this year, I said I will not vote for a Republican or a Democrat. So I understand how the independents feel. I get it. I totally get it. But when that rare guy like Kennedy comes along, he's the only person who could make me vote for a Democrat, for God's sake. It's going to hurt to go change my voter registration, buddy. I'm not going to lie.
And we spoke earlier about Trump's indictment. And this is a new poll. I believe it's from CBS. And he's polling stronger now than ever against his Republican rivals. 61%. He's up 38.
And that's since the indictment?
Yeah, I guess.
Wow.
I'm not sure exactly when the poll was done, but this is the most recent thing. 61% DeSantis a distant second at 23. Scott at 4%, Pence 4, Haley 3, Ramaswamy 1, Hutchinson 1, Burgum 1, Elder 1, Chris Christie 1. I told you, Chris Christie, that you didn't stand a chance. You're wasting your money. Stay home.
It's kind of shaping up to be almost the same field that we saw back in 2016. I'm just waiting for Jeb Bush to throw his hat in the ring too.
Yeah. Well, they're saying that DeSantis is in the bag for Jeb Bush, right?
There you go.
So he's the Jeb Bush replacement.
I think so. Yeah, he's the Jeb Bush of this race, isn't he? He is. Even from Florida.
I don't know. Trump has his supporters. What can you say?
Certainly
they're loyal. They're loyal. And the more that, this is the same thing we saw happen in 2016, and the whole thing backfired. The more the media attacks Donald Trump, the more the deep state comes after Donald Trump, the more popular he becomes. Yeah. And I don't know what the whole point of this stupid federal indictment is. I read it. Rick read the whole darn thing on the show the other day, all the pages of it. And, it sounds to me like he's being prosecuted for the same thing that every ex-president has probably done for many, many years. They frequently have those documents around, and they might not be secured as best as the National Archives might like them to be. I mean, they might even be out in the garage parked next to the Corvette.
Could
or
be
in Chinatown. But it's sort of like the Watergate scandal, right? How Nixon was really just caught doing the same thing that presidents had been doing forever. Yeah. So, and what's interesting to me, though, as a historian, is that usually ex-presidents are already at work on their presidential library, And these documents normally would be housed at the presidential library or would be in temporary storage while the library is being built, and then they're moved to a secure location like a presidential library. But Trump doesn't have a presidential library yet. I don't even know if he's planning to build one. I haven't heard anything about.
He wants
plans
his
for a
second
library.
term first.
I think
He
you're
doesn't
right,
want to
Rick.
get cheated out of it.
Yeah, it's like he's not even thinking about that yet. He just wants to get back in the White House.
Was Biden thinking about his? Is that why he's stuffing boxes all over the place?
Exactly. That's my point.
He wants his second term too.
He does. Even though I don't think he will survive it. I don't.
I think him as a candidate is nothing more than to get Kamala Harris in as president.
I'm afraid so. That scares the daylights out of me, Kevin. That's why when I hear Republicans in Congress talking about impeaching Trump, I'm like, no, I'm not Trump, Biden. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. Don't force Kamala Harris.
I don't think I could stand to listen to the laugh over and over and over again. Oh, they wouldn't do that to us, would they?
Yeah.
I mean, I know they're evil, but they're not that evil, are they?
Oh, yeah.
That's just torture. That's cruel and unusual punishment, man. Oh,
my goodness.
We're in big trouble. We're in big trouble. And, I hear a lot of my fellow Americans say privately, most will never say this in public, but they tell me privately, if they could vote for Vladimir Putin, they would. If he was running for president of the United States, he'd get elected. If there was an election for president of the world, who do you think would win?
I think it would be Putin.
I think so, too. With President Xi Jinping probably not very far behind.
Vice president, yeah.
That's the real new world order that's coming that nobody really wants to admit in the West, that there is a new multipolar world order, and it's going to be led by Russia and China. And despite all of our flailing and our militarism and our imperialism, there's really nothing we can do to stop it. And it seems like everything that we are doing is only accelerating this new world order that we're not going to be leading.
Yeah, it is. I mean, what are we doing by putting weapons in Taiwan? Same thing as Ukraine, and yet the U.S. government says, no, we believe in the one China policy. Well, okay, we believe in the one United States policy, but, hey, if Russia's given Texas a bunch of weapons, might have something to say about it.
Exactly. And, it's something that really bothers me is I hear the language starting to change, just as we heard for 7 years about Putin, Russia. Now it's China. They're trying to, make that our new foreign policy initiative. They're trying to start a war over there with China, which is insane. And you hear our politicians, talking like they can't just say China. They can't just say the Chinese government. It's always communist China, red China, all these inflammatory words. They can't say the Chinese people. They say the communist Chinese. It's like, what I mean? It's like they have to stir things up.
It's how you say it. Like when Trump says it's like China.
I
have a treat for us here.
Oh, yes. Remix, right. Bros. Hit it.
You landed haymakers on Joe Biden. How do you go from being such a passionate opponent?
It was a debate.
You're considered the most liberal United States senator. Somebody said that, and it actually was Mike Pence on the debate stage.
Oh, boy.
She kept laughing. Is there something wrong with her, too? The media said Joe Biden's president. Is there something wrong with her? She kept laughing. The media said what?
Oh God, that's priceless.
That was awesome.
Well,
See, we have
just
to
a
laugh.
little prelude to what's coming. Yeah, for the
Brace
Harris
yourselves.
presidency. Fasten your seatbelts.
Yeah, well, you got to laugh to keep from crying. Good Lord, that's our next president if we don't stop her.
Oh my goodness.
Yikes. Terrifying, isn't it? Now imagine her with her finger on the button.
Oh, jeez.
Oh. Oh.
No, don't impeach Biden, okay? As much as I can't stand that guy, please
I'm
don't do
afraid
that
he's
to
going to
us.
fall over and land on it.
He'll trip over it.
Oh, there's a new twist on Dr. Strangelove.
Indeed. Oh my goodness. Oh, Kevin. Thank you so much for joining us today. We kind of wanted to leave this thing on a funny note because that's what we do here at Maverick News. We're a very serious news organization here. As
Very,
you can
very
tell.
serious, as you can
Very
see.
serious.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm back.
Oh my goodness. Did you have any closing remarks? Anything you wanted to tell our viewers before we say goodbye?
Oh, no, just keep getting your news from where you are right now. Forget the 3-letter guys. Anything that has 3 letters in it seems to be, no good anymore. CIA, CBS, and realistically, those 3-letter news services do get articles plugged into them by the US government, even without those news services knowing that they're being plugged in. So,
They're all the CIA News Network, basically.
Yeah. It's a good name for them, CIA News.
That's what I call them.
Yeah.
Yes.
All of
exactly right.
All of them. But we don't. Here at Maverick News, we get our news from guys like you who are actually there on the ground in Crimea. That's why I wanted to talk to you today, because this attack on the dam was a huge story this week. And, we know each other from the Scott Ritter Network, but I wanted to bring you on Maverick News and let our viewers get to know you. We have had another American friend in Crimea on the show, our friend Regis. You know Regis?
Regis is a good friend. He lives just up the road from me.
Really?
Yeah, Regis
Well,
Trump.
say hi to him for us. Tell him we said
I will.
hello. He's a good friend of the show. And we always like to talk to people in Russia, because what's the point of having all this amazing technology that makes it possible if we don't use it? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, we want to hear from you. And it's so amazing that we can do this, even though it's 2:00 in the morning over there.
3:00 now.
Oh, my
boy.
goodness.
I'm sorry we kept you up so late.
Yes.
Thank you for doing
But
this.
before we go, tell people again how they can find you online.
You can find me online at americancrimea.site or at infowars.press.
You don't work for Alex Jones, do you?
I do not work for Alex Jones.
I thought that was some subsite of InfoWars when I first saw it.
I was lucky to get it, and I'm thankful that Russians don't care about what U.S. law thinks anymore.
Well, I'm extremely grateful for the time you've spent here with us, especially given that you are doing this in the early morning hours over there, and depriving yourself of sleep. It's been a great interview, and I'm eager to get you back on here again, in the not very distant future. We're going to need you.
Anytime.
It's been my pleasure and my honor to be on with you guys. So thank you for inviting me. And anytime, just reach out whenever you want to know something that's going on in Crimea or Russia.
Okay.
Thank you for being our source on the ground, and thanks for being our friend. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye now.
for now. Wow, that was a fantastic interview, Lori.
I
Thank
knew
you
you'd
for-
love him.
Yeah, thank
I
you
just
for
knew you'd
bringing
love
him
him.
over. Yeah.
You can't help but love him. I just think Kevin is awesome.
The
Been wanting to
level
get
of
him for a
knowledge,
while.
the expertise, the the background in cyber security, information warfare. Wow.
Oh, he really knows his stuff,
Yeah.
you know? And we're lucky to have a guy like him willing to talk to the likes of us.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing.
Now you can see why Scott
Amazing
Ritter
guest.
likes him so much too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
They're birds of a feather, those two.
That was easily one of the best interviews that we've ever done here.
I think so too. And we've done
Yeah.
some good ones.
Yeah.
Mr. Walker, we've done some good ones. But yeah.
Yeah.
And it feels like we barely scratched the surface. So yeah, we will have him back.
Absolutely.
Hopefully on a regular basis. I'd like to make him our regular correspondent there in Crimea, our man on the
Wow.
ground.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Absolutely,
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah, I know Regis he's not willing to stay up late. If you want to talk to Regis, you're going to have to do the show a little bit earlier in the day. We always have to pre-tape with
Yeah.
Regis.
Well, that's
But,
okay though. No,
Kevin
it's-
says he's kind of a night owl anyway, so
Yeah.
yeah, he's up this
Wow.
time of night anyhow.
Okay, so let's run a little take a little break here for a moment, and when we come back, we'll dig into some other stuff. So
We'll be
Don't-
back with more stuff.
more
Right after this.
stuff right here.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.